Welcome to Sleepwalk Files. Tonight, we are taking a calm, close look at the Epstein client list cover-up theory. Subscribe for daily stories about strange mysteries made to fall asleep to. Imagine a digital vault containing 300 gigabytes of data. That is an enormous amount of information. We are talking about millions of documents, thousands of emails, countless photographs, and hours of video footage. This is the official size of the evidence cache collected during the investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. It is a mountain of digital paper that should, by all logical accounts, contain the definitive map of one of the most disturbing networks of power in modern history. But here is the question that keeps people awake at night, the one that fuels endless threads on forums like Reddit and Discord. Why, in those 300 gigabytes of data, is there no single definitive client list? For years, the world has spoken about the client list as if it were a physical object, a black book, a master ledger, a spreadsheet of names, dates, and payments that would act as a smoking gun, linking the world's most powerful politicians, billionaires, and royalty to the crimes committed on Epstein's private island. We have seen the flight logs of the Lolita Express, the private jet that shuttled people across the globe. We have seen the depositions of survivors. I've seen the names of people like Donald Trump and other global elites appear in social circles and travel records. Everyone acknowledges that a network existed. Everyone agrees that Epstein provided a service to a specific group of high-profile individuals. Yet, when the documents are finally unsealed or leaked, the master list is nowhere to be found. This discrepancy is where the mystery turns into a conspiracy. To the skeptics, the absence of a list is simply a matter of bookkeeping. They argue that a man like Epstein wouldn't be foolish enough to keep a neatly typed directory of his co-conspirators. They say the list isn't a single document, but a fragmented puzzle scattered across a million different emails and calendar entries. But to those who follow the trail on sites like r/FalsoffEpstein, this explanation feels like a convenient lie. They believe the list did exist, and that it was the primary target of a massive, coordinated scrubbing operation. The theory is simple and chilling. The master ledger was too dangerous to exist in a public court record. If such a document existed, it wouldn't just be a list of names. It would be a ledger of compromise. It would be the blueprint for a global blackmail operation. The claim is that before the 300 gigabytes of evidence were processed and released, a surgical strike was performed on the data. The most damaging files, the ones that explicitly linked the most powerful people on Earth to the most heinous acts, were deleted, redacted, or hidden in plain sight. Think about the scale of that operation. To scrub a master list from a dataset that large, you would need more than just a technician. You would need access to the highest levels of government and judicial authority. You would need people who could walk into a secure evidence room or log into a federal server and erase a specific set of files without leaving a digital footprint. This is why the ghost of the client list continues to haunt the public consciousness. It is the void at the center of the story. We have the periphery, the island, the planes, the mansions, and the victims. We have the millions of pages of supporting evidence. But the heart of the matter, the definitive proof of who was involved and who paid for what, remains missing. We are left staring at a 300 gigabyte mountain of data, wondering if the most important piece of the puzzle was stolen right from under our noses. If the master list was scrubbed, where did the cleaners start? To find the answer, you have to look at the flight logs. For years, the public has been obsessed with the Lolita Express, the private Boeing 727 that served as a shuttle for the world's most powerful men. On the surface, the logs are just lists of dates and destinations. But when you look closer, the logs start to feel less like a record and more like a puzzle with missing pieces. Researchers and internet sleuths on forums like r/FalsoffEpstein have pointed out a recurring pattern of anomalies. There are dates where the plane clearly took off, yet the passenger manifests for those specific trips are either missing or heavily redacted. It is a strange kind of silence. In a legal discovery process, you expect to see some redactions for privacy or national security, but the pattern here feels surgical. The gaps don't seem random. They tend to appear around the dates of the most high-profile gatherings or the trips to the most secluded locations. Then there is the discrepancy between the social record and the travel record. We have photos. We have witness testimonies. We have public figures who admitted to knowing Epstein and visiting his properties. Yet, when you cross-reference these names with the official flight logs released to the public, some of those names simply aren't there. It creates a haunting question. How does a person appear in a photograph at a specific location, but vanish from the manifest of the only plane that could have taken them there? The theory is that there were two sets of books, one for the FAA and the official record, and one for Epstein himself. The rumor is that the real manifests, the ones that listed every passenger, every guest, and every secret detour, were part of that missing ledger of compromise. When the 300 gigabytes of evidence were gathered, these true logs were the primary targets. Imagine a document that doesn't just say who flew, but who flew with whom, and who was present during the most illicit hours of the trip. That isn't just a travel log. It is a map of a secret society. If you wanted to protect a global network of power, you wouldn't just delete the names. You would rewrite the timeline. You would create a version of history where certain people were never in the air, never landed on the island, and never stepped foot in those houses. This is why the redacted lines in the documents are so frustrating to those searching for the truth. A black bar over a name is an admission that something is there. It is a physical marker of a secret. But a missing page, or a date that simply doesn't exist in the log, is a different kind of erasure. It is an attempt to make the world forget that the event ever happened. As the public digs through the fragmented emails and calendar entries, the gaps in the flight logs become a vacuum. Every time a new high-profile name is linked to Epstein through a leaked photo or a court deposition, people go back to the logs to see if that person is listed. When they find a blank space or redaction on the exact date of the visit, the theory of a deliberate erasure grows stronger. The paper trail hasn't disappeared entirely. It has just been turned into a shadow, leaving us to guess who was standing in the dark. If the flight logs were the map, then Little St. James was the destination. But for those who have studied the layout of that private island in the US, Virgin Islands, the question isn't just who went there, but what was happening in the walls. When you look at the aerial photos and the leaked descriptions of the estate, you see a place designed for luxury, yes, but also for absolute control. There is a specific, unsettling theory that has taken hold in online research communities and YouTube breakdowns. The idea that the real client list wasn't a piece of paper or a digital spreadsheet at all. Instead, the theory claims the list was a living archive of video and audio recordings. Think about the architecture of the island. You have the main residence, the guest houses, and that strange blue-striped building with the gold dome that looked more like a temple than a home. For years, rumors have swirled about the interior of these structures. Investigators and whistleblowers have suggested that the island was wired. We aren't talking about a few security cameras at the front gate. We are talking about a comprehensive surveillance system embedded into the very fabric of the rooms where the world's most powerful people relaxed. The claim is that Epstein didn't just want to host these figures, he wanted to own them. If you are a billionaire, a head of state, or a royal, and you are caught on camera doing something illegal or deeply compromising, you are no longer a guest. You are an asset. This is where the theory of the dark ledger comes in. The real list wasn't a directory of names, it was a library of leverage. A digital vault of blackmail material that ensured the people on those flight logs would do whatever was asked of them, or at the very least, stay silent about what happened on the island. This would explain why the search for a single, definitive document has been so fruitless. If the evidence was stored on a private, encrypted server or a series of hard drives hidden within the island's infrastructure, it wouldn't appear in a standard court filing of emails and calendars. It would be a separate entity entirely. When the authorities finally raided the properties, the question became, did they find the servers, or were the servers gone before they even stepped off the boat? On forums like Reddit, users often point to the sheer scale of the 300 gigabytes of evidence as a hint. That is a massive amount of data for a financier, but it is a very small amount of data for a high-definition surveillance archive. This discrepancy leads many to believe that the most damning files, the actual recordings, were scrubbed or spirited away long before the public ever heard the word discovery. The fascination with the island's layout stems from this feeling of a trap. Every corridor, every hidden room, and every blind spot in the foliage becomes a clue. People obsess over the images of the island because they are looking for the physical evidence of a panopticon. They aren't looking for a guest book, they are looking for the lens. The idea that a small island in the Caribbean served as a global hub for compromise turns the story from a criminal case into a spy novel. It suggests that the architecture of secrecy was built into the stone and sand, creating a place where the elite felt safe, only to realize they were being recorded by the very man they trusted to keep their secrets. Why is it that the most critical pieces of evidence in a global scandal always seem to vanish exactly when the public starts asking the right questions? If you look at the timeline of Jeffrey Epstein's final days, you don't see a clean legal process. Instead, you see a series of convenient failures. In July 2019, Epstein was arrested and held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York City. This was a high-security federal facility, the kind of place where every movement is tracked, every door is logged, and every corridor is under the watchful eye of a camera. But by August 10th, the narrative shifted. The official report stated that Epstein had died by suicide in his cell. But as the news broke, the details began to fray. First, there was the matter of the guards. It later emerged that the two officers assigned to watch him had fallen asleep, browsing the internet on their phones, instead of monitoring a man who had already been placed on suicide watch after a previous attempt. Then came the cameras. In a facility designed for maximum oversight, the security footage from the hallway leading to Epstein's cell was reportedly unavailable or malfunctioning. For those following the story on forums like Reddit, this wasn't just a series of bureaucratic blunders. It was a window of opportunity. The theory is that the time between his arrest and his death provided a frantic, narrow window for anyone with the right access to sanitize the record. If a master ledger or a digital archive of compromise existed, the Metropolitan Correctional Center was the last place it should have been easy to hide something. Yet, the gaps in the surveillance logs created a blind spot that persists to this day. As the months passed, the pressure for transparency peaked. The public expected a reckoning, a list of names, a roadmap of the network. But what followed was a slow, agonizing drip of redacted documents. We saw the release of flight logs, yes, but they were often fragmented. We saw emails, but the most incriminating parts were frequently blacked out by court order. This is where the timeline becomes truly eerie. Every time a legal battle pushed the courts closer to unsealing a specific set of files, a new delay would appear. The process of discovery became a game of attrition. The documents that did emerge were often thousands of pages of administrative noise, while the core evidence, the specific logs that could link high-profile figures to the crimes on the island, remained elusive. Think about the timing. Epstein was the only person who knew exactly where every body was buried, figuratively and literally. He was the bridge between the money, the power, and the secrets. The moment that bridge collapsed in a New York jail cell, the incentive to protect the remaining names became an absolute priority. When you look at the dates, the pattern suggests a strategic erasure. The malfunctioning cameras in August, the sleeping guards, the redacted court filings of 2020 and 2021. It feels less like a series of accidents and more like a coordinated effort to ensure that the trail stopped at the cell door. People are haunted by this timeline because it suggests that the system didn't just fail to protect a prisoner, it succeeded in protecting a network. The mystery isn't just about who was on the list, but about who had the power to make the evidence disappear in the middle of a federal facility. It leaves us with a chilling question. If the cameras were off and the guards were asleep, who was actually in the room? If the evidence was so vast, who actually held the keys to the archive? To understand how a master list could vanish, you have to look at the gatekeepers. For decades, Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't just a partner. She was the architect of the logistics. She was the one who managed the schedules, the travel, and the recruitment. In the eyes of many investigators and theorists, Maxwell was the human firewall. She was the only person besides Epstein who knew exactly which names were recorded in which ledgers, and more importantly, where the digital backups were stored. When she was finally arrested and brought to trial, the world expected a floodgate of names to open. Instead, we got a wall of silence. The legal battles that followed her arrest became a masterclass in obstruction. For years, lawyers fought over the unsealing of documents, arguing that releasing certain names would violate the privacy of non-parties or jeopardize ongoing investigations. But to those watching from the outside, it looked like a strategic scrubbing operation. Every time a document was released, it felt like the edges had been trimmed. We saw the 300 gigabytes of evidence, a massive haul of images, emails, and videos, but the public only ever saw the fragments that the courts deemed safe. This is where the EDKH movement comes in. The phrase "Epstein didn't kill himself" became more than just a meme. It became a shorthand for the belief that the entire legal process was being steered by an invisible hand. The theory suggests that the people who had the most to lose were the same people who had the power to influence the custody of those 300 gigabytes. When you have evidence of that magnitude, it isn't just sitting in a filing cabinet. It is held by government agencies, federal prosecutors, and secure servers. The question people keep asking on forums like Reddit is simple. Who had the administrative access to those servers between August 2019 and the eventual court releases? If a definitive client list existed, it wouldn't have been a simple Excel spreadsheet. It would have been a complex web of data. But the rumors persist that there was a central ledger, something Ghislaine helped maintain, that acted as the ultimate insurance policy. The theory is that this ledger didn't just list names, but linked them to specific dates, specific locations, and specific acts. If such a document existed, the motive to sanitize the files wouldn't just be about avoiding a lawsuit. It would be about preventing a global collapse of political and financial trust. Think about the scale of the people involved. We are talking about heads of state, billionaires, and intelligence figures. The motive to protect these individuals transcends any single political party or country. This is why the erasure feels so professional. It isn't the work of a panicked assistant deleting emails. It feels like a systemic sanitization. The people who had the access, the high-level officials in the Department of Justice and the security details at the Metropolitan Correctional Center, were the only ones capable of ensuring that the trail stopped exactly where it needed to. The most haunting part of this is the realization that the gatekeepers didn't just hide the list, they changed the narrative. They turned a concrete collection of evidence into a ghost story. By releasing millions of pages of irrelevant data, they buried the needle in a haystack of administrative noise. They gave us the 300 gigabytes, but they kept the map. And as long as the map remains classified or deleted, the architects of the silence remain untouchable, leaving the rest of us to wonder who was truly in charge of the files. If you look at the life of Jeffrey Epstein, there is a gap that doesn't make sense. He was a man with a mysterious source of wealth, a financier who didn't seem to have many actual clients in the traditional sense. Lived in the stratosphere of global power, rubbing shoulders with presidents and royalty, yet he operated like a ghost in the financial system. This leads us to a question that changes everything. If the missing list wasn't just a directory of guests, but a weapon, what was it actually used for? There is a persistent theory, discussed in the darker corners of the web and by former intelligence analysts, that Epstein wasn't just a predator or a financier. The claim is that he was an intelligence asset. Not for one specific agency, but perhaps as a bridge between several. In the world of espionage, there is a term for what this would be: a honey trap operation on a global scale. The theory suggests that the client list was never meant to be a legal document. It was a ledger of compromise. Imagine a system where the goal wasn't just to facilitate crimes, but to record them in high definition. This is where the rumors of the hidden cameras on Little St. James become more than just a creepy detail. If you are an intelligence agency and you want to ensure that a foreign leader or a domestic politician does exactly what you want, you don't bribe them with money. You capture them in a moment of absolute vulnerability. You create a file that can end their career, their reputation, and their life in a single leak. Under this lens, the list becomes a map of leverage. It wouldn't just be a name and a date. It would be a catalogue of secrets. This explains why the erasure of the files feels so surgical. If the documents contained evidence of simple crimes, a few payoffs or a quiet settlement might suffice. But if the files contained evidence of systemic blackmail used to manipulate the gears of national security, then the erasure isn't just about protecting individuals. It becomes a matter of state survival. Think about the people who have been linked to Epstein over the decades. We see names like Donald Trump appearing in the early social circles, or figures from the British royal family and the highest levels of the Israeli and American governments. In a normal criminal case, these names are leads. In a blackmail operation, these names are assets. If Epstein was running a compromat operation, he was essentially the keeper of the keys to the kingdom. This theory suggests that Epstein's value to his handlers was his ability to collect these secrets. But the danger is that the collector eventually becomes the liability. Once the collector is caught, the entire network of leverage is threatened. The missing list is the ultimate insurance policy. If it were to go public, it wouldn't just result in a few arrests. It could potentially trigger a collapse of trust in the very institutions that govern the modern world. This is why the story continues to haunt people. It moves the mystery away from a simple case of a rich man getting away with murder and into the realm of deep state architecture. The fear isn't just that some powerful people did terrible things. The fear is that those terrible things were intentionally recorded and used as a leash to pull the strings of power from the shadows. If the list was a ledger of compromise, then the people who deleted it didn't do it to be kind. They did it to make sure the leash remained invisible. But what if the mystery isn't about what was stolen, but about what we're imagining? There is a persistent, unsettling feeling that there is a single gold-leafed ledger sitting in a vault somewhere, a master list of names that would bring down governments if it were leaked. It is the perfect plot for a thriller. But if you step away from the forums and look at the actual mechanics of legal discovery, a different, perhaps more frustrating picture emerges. The skeptics argue that the missing list is a ghost, a myth born from a fundamental misunderstanding of how evidence actually works in a case this sprawling. In the legal world, there is rarely such a thing as a client list unless the person was running a formal business with a membership roster. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't running a club. He was running a chaotic, decades-long web of influence. The legal explanation is that the evidence isn't a single document, but a fragmented mosaic. We are talking about 300 gigabytes of data. That is millions of separate files. It is thousands of emails, scribbled calendar entries, flight manifests, and address books. In this version of the story, there is no smoking gun because the gun was broken into 10,000 pieces and scattered across a mountain of digital noise. When the public hears that the list hasn't been released, they imagine a specific piece of paper being withheld. Lawyers argue that the names are already there, hidden in plain sight. They are buried in the footnotes of depositions, mentioned in passing in a witness's testimony, or listed as a guest on a dinner invitation from 1994. To find a name, you don't look at a list. You have to spend months indexing thousands of disparate documents. The missing list might not be a cover-up, but a clerical reality. The names aren't gone. They are just inconveniently distributed. This creates a strange tension between the investigators and the internet. On sites like Reddit, users in communities like FileSoft Epstein are convinced that the fragmented nature of the evidence is a deliberate tactic. They argue that by refusing to compile a definitive list, the authorities are gaslighting the public, forcing them to do the detective work themselves, while the most damning connections remain redacted. They see the lack of a centralized document not as a lack of evidence, but as a sophisticated form of censorship. Then there is the matter of the flight logs. We have seen the manifests for the Lolita Express, and we have seen names that make the world shudder. But skeptics point out that being on a plane doesn't automatically make someone a co-conspirator. A politician might have flown to a meeting. A scientist might have been recruited for a lecture. Skeptics' ledger suggests that the list is a vacuum that we fill with our own suspicions. We want a definitive document because a document provides a binary answer. You are either on the list or you aren't. But the truth of power is rarely binary. It is grey. It is a series of maybe and possibly, and it depends on who was in the room. If there was never one single list, then the hunt for it becomes a wild goose chase. It means the smoking gun doesn't exist in the format we want. It means the truth isn't a revelation, but a slow, grueling process of connecting dots that may never fully form a picture. Still, that explanation doesn't quiet the noise. Because even if a single ledger is a myth, the fact remains that the evidence is fragmented, the redactions are heavy, and the most powerful people mentioned in those 300 gigabytes have largely remained untouched. Whether the list is a physical object or a digital ghost, the void it left behind is where the real conspiracy lies. Why is it that when a mystery is officially solved, the obsession only grows deeper? Usually, when a court case closes or a set of documents is released, the public moves on. But with the Epstein files, the opposite happened. The more the government released, the more the internet became convinced that the most important part was still missing. It is a psychological phenomenon where the gap in the record becomes more interesting than the record itself. If you spend enough time on forums like r/filesof-epstein or the deep threads of conspiracy commons, you will see that the search for the list has evolved into something else entirely. It is no longer just about a piece of paper or a digital spreadsheet. It has become a digital afterlife. For thousands of online detectives, the missing list is a vacuum. And in nature, a vacuum always pulls things into it. Every time a new political scandal breaks or a high-profile figure is caught in a lie, the internet immediately drags that name back to the ghost of the client list. The list has become a universal symbol for the secrets that the powerful keep from the powerless. There is a specific kind of frustration that fuels this. On Reddit and Discord, users trade screenshots of redacted lines and blurred names, treating them like ancient runes that can be decoded. They point to the 300 gigabytes of evidence as a mountain of noise designed to hide a single, quiet truth. They argue that by giving us millions of pages of emails and calendars, the authorities have performed a sophisticated kind of hiding in plain sight. If you give someone 1,000,000 pieces of a puzzle, but hide the 10 pieces that actually show the face of the killer, the victim of the puzzle is the one who spends their life trying to find those 10 missing scraps. This obsession is kept alive by the way the story has leaked into the political bloodstream. We see it in the way figures like Donald Trump or other global leaders are discussed in relation to the files. Whether it is a professional relationship from the 90s or a casual social encounter, every mention is analyzed for a hidden meaning. The public isn't just looking for names anymore, they are looking for a pattern. They are looking for proof that there is a hidden layer to the world, a shadow government where the rules of law simply do not apply. The tragedy of the missing list is that it may never be found, because it may have never existed as a single document. But for the people staring at their screens at 3 in the morning, that doesn't matter. The lack of a final reveal is the most revealing part of the story. It suggests that the system is capable of protecting its own, regardless of how much evidence is leaked. As we close the files on this investigation, we are left with a haunting realization. The mystery of the client list isn't really about Jeffrey Epstein. He was just the architect of the archive. The real story is about our own need for a definitive answer in a world that prefers the gray area. We want a list because a list is a verdict. Without it, we are left with a series of questions that have no one left to answer them. The list is gone, the island is silent, and the files are redacted. But as long as there are names that haven't been called to account, the ghost of that ledger will continue to haunt the digital corners of the world, waiting for a truth that may never arrive. If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to Sleepwalk Files to stay up to date with new mysteries and long videos to fall asleep to every night.